now move on to, where's my notes? Item 8. And we will have Sophie, Adam, and Fran. Oh, Gail. If everyone could introduce themselves and what their role is within Auckland Council, so everyone knows who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is Adam. I'm a senior grant supervisor for the Regional Environment and Natural Heritage Grant.
Kia ora koutou, ko Gail Ogilvie toko ingoa. I'm the General Manager of Environmental Services, which for the new elected members around the table is the department in council that is responsible for council's biodiversity, biosecurity, including Kāri dieback, education for sustainability and climate change action at the household level.
Kia ora koutou, ko Sophie Hayway toko ingoa, and I'm the Group Manager, that's right, isn't it? Still Group Managers of Sustainability Initiatives, which is the education and climate action part of what Gail just mentioned.
Good, thank you for that. And we will just get, is it Sophie, or you'll just go through the...
I was going to make a few words.
Oh.
I'm just here to briefly provide some context on Auckland Council use of grants for environmental improvements. I just thought it'd be useful before we spend most of the session talking about this year's Regional Environment Natural Heritage Grant. Firstly, starting with the history, this grant goes back to Auckland Regional Council. So it was picked up and brought into the amalgamated Auckland Council. So it's been going for quite a few years. Originally, it was just strictly biodiversity and water quality. So it was originally set up to provide funding for private landowners to do things like fencing and planting along streams. So about 5 years ago, we expanded it to include climate change and sustainability. We didn't change the title. It was always the Regional Environment Natural Heritage Grant, but it does now include climate change and sustainability outcomes, which you will have seen in the paper. And obviously with the biodiversity, there's the Healthy Waters connection as well. At the same time, it's about 5 or 6 years ago now, we also extended it to allow for multi-year funding. So it's since the targeted rate passed a year ago also changed, in that you will have seen we've been able to support the original business as usual funding for the grant with a greater amount of funding through the targeted rate. But with that as well, and this is targeted rate funding now only, we've also got a separate grant which we call the Community and Conservation Coordination Fund, which has been set up to support embedded community members coordinating what they do with their natural environment outcomes. So given that, from our perspective, although it's an extremely effective mechanism to allocate public sector money, we're just also aware that it's growing quite organically. So we're doing a review of the funding. Again, the targeted rate allows us to sit back and reassess some of these things. So I just wanted to signal that we are doing that review, and we'll come back to this table if there are any significant changes that require governance overview based on that review. So that review will take account of things like cost to serve, composite reporting, so we know we're getting maximum leverage from this grant investment, and also a bit more joined upness with other investment grants that come in from organisations like Foundation North, GIFT, Department of Conservation, obviously, so it's a bit more joined up across the regions. So I just wanted to provide that history and signal that review before I pass on to Sophie to talk through this year's granting outcomes.
Thank you, Gail. Now, I would prefer if we went through the presentation before questions, unless, Councillor Newman, you want to ask something specific prior to the presentation?
Well, I didn't have questions on the presentation. I mean, the information's been sent out. I'm quite happy with the office's recommendations on the grants. So what I was going to do, I mean, I'm relaxed to just go to a vote now, but others might want to triage this application by application, is to just move the recommendation set out under this item.
Thank you both for that. We will just, I'd prefer you go through the presentation, especially for new councillors, the public, anyone watching, but it's a very, very important area and some fantastic work. So I'll just let you go through the presentation and then we'll have questions.
That could have been my shortest appearance. Congratulations, Richard, as well. It's exciting to be here as a person who's devoted my life to environment and climate change to be at this committee, your first one. Thank you. Just a bit of a recap on the program as Gail's talked to you about the history. So we cover 4 categories: conservation, sustainable living, healthy waters and kaitiakitanga. Just a little recap of some of the projects that you've agreed to fund over the last 12 months. This is the Project Light Club, which supports sports clubs with the reduction of carbon emissions from their centres. We have a whole range of conservation projects. This includes bat roosting sites in the Hurnua Ranges, bat radio tracking in the Waitakere Ranges, ecological enhancement of the Awaroa Wetland Reserve and the Tread Lightly Caravan project. Also the Matuku Link infrastructure requirements from the Matuku Reserve Trust and the Habitat Te Henga project, which Forest and Bird run. This is a Healthy Waters program run by Sustainable Coastlines called Love Your Coast. And in the Kaitiakitanga, this is an example of the Papatuanuku Kokiri Marae Sustainability Champions Parawehi project. So some really cool stuff there that you've funded. So this is just the process that we've been through. I'm not going to go into any detail on that other than we've done an awful lot. There's been a lot of support for community groups to get their applications together and screening applications. There's been a panel workshop. A lot of staff have been engaged in assessing these from a range of aspects. All of them have had a Kaitiakitanga lens put on them, and my team have supported that. Here we are today in the green at decision-making time. Applicants will be informed as soon as we're able, and after this meeting, projects will be implemented from January to January next year. And we get an accountability report from each of these projects in February, so we'll be receiving this year's ones in February coming, and we will come back to you with that report of how they've gone. So just really quickly on the applications received, it's all in the report, which I'm sure you've read. There was about an equal amount of both number and request for funding from those applications. It shows you how we weight it. These weightings are done individually, and then the moderation happens, so we sort of, have a look at them all in the whole. Applications that are recommended for approval, it follows a similar line, so about the same amount approved as there were applications in that area, so it all seems pretty fair and consistent. There were a total of 69 applications. We always receive way too many applications than we can fund. Unfortunately, there's some amazing projects that don't get funding, but the total amount funded, including multi-year grants, is nearly $1 million, so that's an incredible amount of investment into the natural environment. That includes, as Gail said, funding, nearly half of that comes from the Natural Environment Targeted Rate, which you've also approved. And this is a bit of a geographical distribution of the applications. It's a little bit hard because a lot of the projects are regional, and so it's a little bit hard to assign them to a local board area, but this sort of gives you a bit of a spread of those applications. Happy to take questions.
Cool, thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. With the Healthy Waters projects, is that separate from the Healthy Waters targeted rate, water quality targeted rate projects? This is sort of an overlap?
Yeah, so there is no overlap. So the Healthy Waters and the Regional Environment and Natural Heritage will focus on fencing projects on properties with significant ecological areas and biodiversity focus areas, in addition to other kinds of promotional work to improve the quality of water, but sometimes when the project could be funded from the water quality targeted rate, we do divert some of the projects from RENA internally and do that and advise the applicants, or fund them on the same decision and maybe get the money from another WBS code. But for this one, this didn't happen. We moved 3 applicants earlier at that time to the Healthy Waters route.
Still on questions, Councillor Coombe, Deputy Chair Coombe.
Kia ora, thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora koutou. It's absolutely wonderful to see what the applicants are doing with the grants and what's happening around the motu. I went along with the Deputy Mayor. We were at the Conservation Awards not that long ago, and there was just such a celebration and particularly amazing support for the targeted rate that has allowed this fund to be increased. And this does lead to my question around whether Gail, you did mention about the establishment of a separate fund in addition to this. So I didn't catch the name of it, but I'm just curious to know, is there a need for a fund that's more directed very clearly towards climate action? Because that's obviously becoming a very big area of concern, and it might not be so clear for applicants that this can be about climate action, and that could expand into a whole range of things. And also, is it the fund that you talked about that's been established that allows for groups to apply for funding for the resources that they need to actually do the applications, which I know are very intensive and can take a lot of time. So you always get this catch-22 where groups want to be out doing fantastic stuff out in the field, but then they can't get the funding for the admin people because it doesn't fit the criteria. So there's sort of 2 parts to that question.
Thank you, Councillor Coombe. There are 2 parts to that question. I'll answer the part around the embedded community coordination that we're funding first. So the name of that fund is the Community Coordination Fund, and it was set up as a separate part funded by the targeted rate to achieve exactly what you've just summarised. The feedback that we get from the community groups is great that there's an opportunity to apply for public funding, but the public funding is set up to work for projects that have a beginning, middle and end, work effectively for that type of community work, but not fund the sort of requirement that the administration, the coordination, the people who will be, able to apply for the applications. So, or the funding. So the Community Coordination Fund is specifically set up. I think we've got about 17 community coordinators now around the region, and those community coordinators are also employed. There's a large number of what we call umbrella groups now set up in the community space, like putting together, for example, the Northwest Wild Link project, the Kaipatiki linked up landscape scale work. So those coordinators bring those projects together and coordinate as part of the community. So they're community members that we're paying in those roles. So that's that fund, supported by the targeted rate, Community Coordination Fund. In terms of your second question, the climate change, absolutely. When I referred back to when we changed the scope of the Environment Natural Heritage Grant to what it is before you now, it works well, except it's actually quite challenging to, in one place, determine the merits of planting along a stream front, for example, with a high biodiversity value area, and a community group like Project Lightfoot that is out supporting carbon footprint reduction through sports clubs. So what we've found is we're in a situation where now that we've got multiple outcomes, we've got calibration methods for putting those together so that we can effectively rank them. But there is absolutely, I think, really strong rationale for having separate funding that is focused on climate change, sustainability, and supporting ongoing funding for biodiversity and water quality.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Good report. Totally support the grants. Not an issue. The question or the issue that I just want to raise is just around the strategic approach that we're taking. And if I just delve into that a bit, as it goes to the Community Coordination Fund, totally support that. That is having a phenomenal impact. And as you point out, part of that approach strategically is around encouraging umbrella groups so that instead of a situation where we have lots of individual groups approaching us for this and that, the encouragement is that within a geographical area, that could be Upper Harbour, could be Kaipatiki, could be wherever, the groups actually collaborate and they work things through and they're sharing. It's much more economical, it's much more tactical. So that's really great. Just picking up on the issue that Councillor Coombe raises around climate change, totally endorse that. Having said that, I led out the Council's climate action strategy in a previous term. I had a lot of liaison with a lot of groups, and the demands in that area are absolutely massive. Absolutely massive. So if we are going to do something, it should not be just a token approach. Otherwise, that will simply be
We're just good
laughed at.
as a question, please.
So,
Councillor Walker.
I thought we were beyond questions now. Have we finished the questions? Okay. Okay. Well, I'll then pick up my thread after questions.
Still on questions. Thank you, Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. Just a couple of questions. I note that just in the last slide with applications and the support people get to do applications, I was just wondering if that was if after a year, that seemed to be my interpretation, that's when they provide an accountability report. Is there ongoing communication with them between that time?
Yeah, do you want to do that?
So the projects can either be 1 year projects or multi-year projects up to 3 years. So we usually give applicants a call every 3 months to check out what's going on. And after the reporting period, they would submit an accountability report. The subject matter experts were reviewing. And then we acquit the projects and send thank you letters and request photos and stuff. And we also do forward invitations to attend events if the applicants would request them.
Thank you. Just a supplementary to that, Chair, is I know that you send the decline letter and people are working with you for applications. Is there much work that goes on afterwards as far as those who've had their applications declined as to how they might get it to a position where it would have a better chance of being accepted?
Yeah, so usually we would send them the decline letters, and all the letters will indicate that they are encouraged to contact us. And sometimes when we decline something, we would offer another way to fund it. So we would direct them directly to local boards or maybe some other council funding sources. Sometimes council could fund it through other avenues. So we try to work with them and try to keep everyone as happy as possible within the funding that we have.
So I just want to add to that. Sometimes people most of the applicants only get a part of what they've asked for, and they need support to top that up as well. My team, particularly in the sustainable living area, we work a lot with the corporate sector in funding, things that we can't quite fund, and so we'll work with them on projects that contribute to what we're have an objective to try and deliver. We'll bring them in and support them and see how we can add that into the packages we build. Yeah.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, my question just is around the natural environment targeted rate and the pretty much doubling plus of the allocation into this fund. So what I still am looking for is by adding more, because I thought the natural environment targeted rate was to sort of bring forward a work program to, deliver stuff in that space. So I'm just understanding how this fits into the wider picture, and that's the bit that's missing. So we're taking pretty much $500,000 or 440 out of that fund. Not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm just trying to see, how do I know that's a good thing, because everything else that's left to do other things with is still going to meet the objective. That's just a bit that's missing from this report from my perspective. Can you give me some context around that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. I think probably the most important perspective in terms of answering that question is recognising that 75% of Auckland's native biodiversity is located on private land. So what we do as an entity in terms of how we manage our regional and our local park estate is important. But we have 75% of the precious environmental taonga that we're mandated to restore on private land. So the grants process gives us a way of equitably and transparently allocating public money to private landowners from a biodiversity perspective, and then obviously the community groups that are receiving this funding. So I think that the fact that this year we've made a call to supplement the funding is essentially a immediate response, recognising the extent of biodiversity that's on private land. But I think, as I mentioned, Councillor Simpson, given the scale of that grant, we're looking now, the targeted rate has given us that chance to step back and review exactly how we best get the ecological outcomes we need through the targeted rate, and the points that have come up as well with respect to investing in ecological conservation outcomes and council's investment in climate change sustainability. So that's why we're doing a review. But for now, the decision was made that this is a equitable, transparent and very effective way of making sure that we deploy some of that targeted rate to the high biodiversity value areas. And Sophie mentioned the work that we do with community groups. We actually now increasingly, because we have maps, we now understand across the region where the really special places are, and now we can go to those private land owners and sort of tap them on the shoulder and say, look, you know, there's this opportunity to receive some public investment through a grant. And of course, the other thing that's important with respect to these grants is they're incredibly effective leverage. So we estimate around a factor of 5 to 1 return for our investment if you look across at what the private landowners or the community groups are also contributing in kind or through corporate support, as Sophie mentioned. So the current situation is really good idea now, and that's what we're doing this year, and that's what we did last year as well, but we're reviewing it.
Can I have a supplementary to Barry, please? So Barry, when we would get a report back on that environmental targeted rate for an annual or quarterly report back, you will incorporate the results from the public, this
Yes,
section of the funding in that whole picture, correct? Yeah.
Correct, we'll do that.
And yeah, just on that as more of a financial thing, and Gail did mention it, when we do invest, you know, the little bit we do invest usually gets 5 times the amount, you know, with volunteer time, other financial input that council, if we were doing, would have to fund that 5 times over. So, and we always acknowledge that there is no way we can do this through operations with the size. Member Wilcox.
Yeah, I've got a series of questions here. So I'm just going to the Māori impact statement. 42 applications recommended for funding were identified. Are these the ones we have in front of us now? Are they the 42? So my question is, they were evaluated as having that by the internal subject matter expert. Is that correct? This is an expert, aren't we? We're talking about a real expert. That's the second question.
Where am I? Yes, so we had I had a person in my team run through it, and she was mentored by a senior person in our relationship management team who oversaw her work. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can have another fly and talk about that. I suppose my question is: so how are we measuring if there's a scoring rate of 10 for Māori outcomes and Māori kaupapa? How are we measuring that, and how are we going to get that feedback from these groups that we've given the grant to?
This year we added an additional emphasis on the evaluation of Maori outcomes. So there is a main outcome, which is Kaitiakitanga, where the project is mainly delivering on Kaitiakitanga outcome, and the Maori outcomes, the contribution towards them in particular is measured in all projects. So we usually, when we meet with the applicants, we gave them an additional set of information on how to engage and how to deliver a Maori outcome. We work to connect them with the iwi hapu if they're doing some work on the land, to make sure they are working with them sustainably and they are involved in the decision making, especially in the conservation projects, and also getting more of the message out and planting days and incorporating te reo in any items that we support. So generally, it will be reviewed against the Council Maori Outcomes document, and then we will score it according to that.
Just to add, so there's 69 applications, all of which are quite detailed, and it's a very big piece of work to go through. So every single application has a response on their Kaitiakitanga section, and so we'll be able to provide that back to all applicants about how they could improve on that as well.
Yeah, that's fine. I suppose I'm just concerned that it becomes a desktop exercise and not engagement, because you can't have kaitiakitanga without a kaitiaki, and you can't have the reo without a kaikorero. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're not doing this as a desktop exercise and saying, yeah, we did this and these are Māori outcomes. And the reason for that is, I mean, everybody wants clean water, everybody wants the creek to look good. That's not a Māori outcome, that's a New Zealand outcome. So I just want to make sure that we're not desktopping this Māori outcome kaupapa.
There's a separate section for specific Maori outcomes that isn't related to the environmental outcome, so it's a special section they have to respond to. Actually, the process that we went around with Kaitiakitanga was designed by a senior person in our relationship management team, so that was designed by her, and we've used her suggestions. We can probably take a bit more detail offline if you want to explore that.
And thank you, Member Wilcox. I am keen, and Deputy Chair Coombe has talked about how going into next year, how we can look at and make sure the these grant applications are the way we want it, and moving forward we're going to improve, especially on the Māori outcomes, and then also things like climate change impact and things that's I think we're doing amazing work, but I think we can do better, and I'd love for your input on that, Member Wilcox. Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions. One was similar to Glenn's, and it was around how we can get some more content around not just the Māori impact statement, but the assessment. So I guess the assessment is about us understanding what you've just explained, but also impact statements, so they're meaningful, you know, if that's possible. And my other question just goes back to what Gail was talking to, just in terms of the review, and what prompts that for me is looking at the spread of applications across the region, looking at the applications themselves and knowing that they are also applying to local boards for funding. So is your review going to have a look at what is the cost of processing grants at a regional level? And is there some efficiencies to be gained by perhaps allocating the funding down to the local board level? There's quite an intensive cost in processing grants. Is that part of your review to look at the efficiencies and the costs?
We're in the process of scoping that review, so I can't answer that question definitively for now. But I think in terms of regional, local delineation, there's quite a lot of work put into A, supporting the applicants, and B, reviewing the applications to make sure that anything that is funded through this targeted rate RENA grant is of regional significance. So ideally, we have regionally significant initiatives funded here, and then that allows then the local boards to, in the knowledge of what's being funded at the regional level, make informed decisions about what they can then supplement at that more local level. But it's a really good point, and I think we'll certainly look at, we already make sure that there's no overlap, obviously, but that still is work that needs to be refined. You know, we have a fairly good understanding, but it could, those processes for checking who's funding what, even across the organisation. You know, you've got 8 different departments supporting community-led conservation. So we're setting up systems to make sure, although we've got some understanding and we certainly check there's no duplication, we definitely need a more joined up picture that includes the regional and the local investment. So it could absolutely be part of that review.
Yeah, if I may add, so all the grants are administered through the grants team. So what happens is we are the same people who also do the local board grants. So once we receive an application, we have a program that helps us. So we check if there are any double dipping or redundancies or any stuff like that. And sometimes we could also arrange for a project, some of it to be funded by local board funding and some through the regional. So we do that, and it's actually the same advisors from our team who handle both things. So we kind of have a bird view vision of what's going on. We also check with the non-contestable, so we know, I mean, where the funding is exactly going, and we're sure there are no redundancies.
Thank you. And I had a question sort of around that, and I know I mentioned it yesterday in the pre-agenda run-through. Is my concern that, and it's great for the North, that we have 27 applications being funded, but the South has 15. My concern is, and I know I only brought it up yesterday, so there's more work to do, but how we can ensure that the areas that we're blessed, like in the North, with a lot of natural native bush and parks and things that, and groups already, you know, protecting that. If the focus on kaitiakitanga, sometimes the South does not have, and it's clear, street trees even, we don't have the things to protect as much as we do in the North. So how do we make sure we look at these applications or work with groups in the South to ensure they're applying more or can be looked at as a bit broader than just protecting what we already have, because there may be ways that we can increase. So in 10 years' time, a council like this can be protecting things in the South that have grown from this fund now, I guess, if I'm making sense.
Yeah, so the team spend a lot of time trying to boost that equity across the region, and I think they do a really good job of targeting their support and their workshops in the areas that are lower, so in the South and in the West. I think the fund that Gail mentioned, the Community Coordinator for CCF, but I'll try not to use it. I think that really helps. So if we can be directing their support as well into those groups, to help them get those applications. As you said yesterday, the North are really well organised. They put in very good, high quality applications. We need to just make sure that we're supporting the South and West in the same way.
Good, thank you. Are you speaking or question?
Just a quick question,
yeah, sure.
if I may. Sorry, just be indulged with a follow-up question. Councillor Simpson's comment just reminded me of something I wanted to ask about the value for money that we get from the grants. And at paragraph 36, it does say what's leveraged by groups. So in terms of the total pool, so all of the applications, if they were all funded, we would get a
7.5.
almost over $7 million worth of contribution to the projects from the group's contribution. So I just wanted to confirm that we're going to pull out the number of the actual funded applications so that when the chair goes out publicly about these grants, that's another good news story that we can highlight to say that, you know, we've got this funding from the natural environment targeted rate. That's brilliant. Everybody's contributing. Look what we're getting for it. And on top of that, we're able to leverage it. I think it's about 3 to 1. So 2 to 1 maybe. If I do my quick sum. So just want to clarify we're going to do that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And we did go back and do the sums. The total applicant contribution for the approved projects is 5,178,000. So quite a lot return, as Gail said, about a 5 to 1 return. Now the difference with that is that was what they requested in funding. Because we only part fund those projects, there will be a downscaling of that based on what they can achieve with the funding they get. So we won't know that until they are notified of what they have. And then they reassess their projects and what they can achieve with that money, and we'll definitely know when we get those reports back at the end of the year. So we know that from what they requested, the approved projects return about a 1 to 5, but with that downscaling, we'll be able to give them a better accurate figure in February after.
Thank you. And now we move on to speaking. Councillor Newman, did you want to lead off as the mover, or are you happy?
No, I just want to vote these through.
Cool, thank you. Councillor Walker, you wanted to finish your speaking turn?
Sure. So I was raising the issue of the need for a strategic approach as it goes across this. And quite obviously part of that approach goes to the community coordination, and that's really great. And I'm assuming that if we've got areas where we don't have sufficient communication and activity, and that could be down south, that we'll be actively cultivating that. I'm also entirely supportive, and I pick up on the relationship with local boards. From speaking to local boards, that relationship is not always clear on their part, and it's not always clear to us on our part. So it would be really good to have some strategic overview over that. In addition to that, it would be useful just to have some strategic overview and reporting on how we're going across the region and the relationship of the targeted rates, these various mechanisms and so on. And I'm mindful back in the 70s and the 80s when, for example, there was a Rodney Ecological Areas study that was quite comprehensive, and at that point the then Conservator Graham Campbell described the loss of vegetation as akin to an ice age because we were experiencing considerable loss at that point. And I'm also mindful that across the private space, and you mentioned that, we are experiencing considerable loss of mature trees across Auckland. It has been huge, and we have as yet had little if any reporting to us on that. So I'm really asking, through you, Mr. Chair, for a strategic approach on how we're doing, what we're doing going forward, and that picks up on some of the comments that Councillor Simpson raised around value for money and so on. I think we need that.
I can confirm that Councillor Deputy Chair Coombe and I definitely support your direction and looking at that, so thank you. And I'll just, if there's anyone else, no? Cool. I'll just briefly comment, thank you very much for all the work. I know this is a mammoth task of getting through the information and scoring everyone and checking out the applications and helping people with applications. I want to thank everyone who applied, and hopefully those who didn't quite make it, they can be encouraged to come back and figure out a way forward to get some good stuff done in their communities. And just thank you again. I think this is a great way of actually doing the mahi in the community, because we can spread that dollar much further, but also it's about community development. It's about connecting neighbourhoods up and getting people really enthused and interested, while we can do some of the tough things like taking away weeds and the things we need to be doing in our parks and reserves we need to do. But I think growing this work with the amount of resource we have as a council and DOC and others, I think that this is the way forward of actually getting people involved and continuing the work. So it's fantastic. It's awesome to see so many funded, but yeah, we will continue looking at how we can improve the process from here. So thank you, everyone, and I will ask for a vote. All in favour of the recommendations? Yeah. Anyone against? Perfect. Thank you very much. Have a good day.